Help each and every one of us to be able to get what we need to hear, Lord, tonight. Again, thank you for meeting the needs. In Jesus' name, amen. Man. So here we are. Let's see what page. I think I've actually got us. Yeah, on page 50. We went through the checklist, didn't we? Yeah, I don't think we got that far. I know we didn't. No, we didn't get that far. But yeah, and that's where we'll start. Let's start on 50. Kind of go with that. Page 50. What's that, sister? Er. Yeah, you must have turned it the wrong way. There we go. Very possible. Get that close and everything. So we're talking about things that that kind of help perpetuate, or it kind of makes it anger kind of persistent and stubborn. We find ourselves with some things in our life that everybody gets angry, but there's some things that seem like he was talking about this fellow named John. He shows depression and other stuff. His wife reads about depression and realizes a lot of anger is connected with depression and all that. She knows something very wrong, so she gets him to go to the doctor. And so, so we're looking at some stuff that kind of helps, that will perpetuate or makes us kind of gets us prone to be angry a lot, or kind of, I guess you call it probably some of the things in our life that needs to be worked out because anger shows up so much. But one of the things we're talking about is dependent, and we know what it means to be dependent. And we're talking about how that, so that we're looking at this, and we checked the statements. I'm trying to catch up with y'all on all this stuff. Of course, a lot of dependency is talking about feeling unloved, how that breeds dependency. We talked about, I think one place we did talk about the kids, things that you can do to kind of help tell the kids and stuff in your family, or communicate to people in a way that lets them know that you do love them. There's nonverbal things that really go a long way. And this John felt love, but he didn't feel love. He felt like his parents loved him, but it never was shown. So that was part of the problem that that's caused him to have anger issues since early childhood. And so here we're looking at the idea of what dependency is. And this is really on page 50 now. We're going to look on this. It says, many ask, is it wrong to be dependent? And the answer is no. It's not. Dependency is present in every personality, he says, with no exceptions. He says, therefore, good reasons. Dependency is the glue that holds relationships together. Again, we are created by the Lord, and we need each other. So that just follows. But what we're looking at is imbalanced dependency. It's the situation he says we want to avoid. So he goes through this thing, I guess, trying to help us understand where he's coming from. But he talked about, how when we're a child's born or whatever, we that crying, that need and stuff, you're so dependent. And, he talked about, you feel love when the infant will feel the love, when it's being nurtured and protected. Also, he says, in childhood, we grow up, and our dependency may not seem as like it was when we were a child, but we still need that acceptance and feel secure. I think about some of the things I read before, like they said sometimes kids love to see mom and daddy kiss, and the reason why they said they like that because they feel secure. They think that they're getting along well and everything's settled at home and real good. Of course, the opposite is true. If they get in a divorce, a lot of times kids will think they're the reason that their parents are getting a divorce. So usually any time divorce happens, there's always a lot of collateral damage that gets involved there. and nobody comes out the winner in divorce, the way I see it. Again, teenagers, we want to be, they got the peer pressure thing. We get adults, we still have. I think we talk about how kids want to have peer pressure, but we do too as adult. It just shows up differently. Again, he says, as adults, we want to be loved by the opposite sex. We want acceptance for our achievements. As parents, we want our kids to think well of us, and we want to belong to the community. So it's all about, that's how God created us. I guess y'all, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but it's obvious that God didn't create people just to live on an island by themselves. God says it's not good for man to be alone. and that's really true. It's really true, And so that's why it's good to have people in your life. Someone had done a seminar down here. We were talking about people in the nursing home. And one of the things they found out, people could have in a nursing home that may have a good mind and everything, but after so long a time in the nursing home, they start kind of losing their mind and stuff. It's a common thing that happens. And what he was saying was that one of the main reasons that happens is because of the lack of relationships and having people around. They're just sitting there, nobody visiting or family or whatever. The more interaction, the more they talk and everything, the better their mind stays. And it is true. It is true, It is for all of us, Being around other people, yeah, it is sometimes a challenge, but also it's something we can't do without. But anyway, he says dependency never ceases to influence our personalities. When it's in the best light, it keeps us tied to relationships. It makes companionship work. Its downside is that it can cause us to be reactors who are prone to anger. Specifically, when your anger is too powerful, it implies you have concluded that you cannot be emotionally stable as long as the people or circumstances in front of you do not satisfy. That was a big statement, but we need to look at that just a second. And that's what he's saying. We're more reactor, how people treat us, and does that affects us about how we feel, where we're going to be up or down that day. Like he says, a roller coaster. If you have one bad thing happen, and some people that just wipes out the whole day for them, if not longer. Just one person looked at another person wrong, or they thought they did. That'd be enough to set some people on a tailspin. So that's what he's talking about. This idea. So again, the guy works with him. He talked about how this was the reason understanding his depression, his underlying anger, because of his tendency to let his emotional stability depend on others. Well, I think I'm going through this maybe just a little too fast, but this is so. I hope I don't do that. Y'all chime in when you want to. But what we fix is start here so big. It says, when I first started examining my emotion, being a pastor, you'd be surprised people don't examine their emotions. Somebody told me years ago that they were having trouble with their weight and went to a doctor. And the doctor told this particular person that they get her emotions under control. Well, that was the first time I ever heard anybody even mention that, the fact that you can control your emotions. If you're like me, growing up, you just thought, well, emotions it happens. You just, and really learning that, yeah, I can definitely, especially by God's help and everything, and understanding how God made us, we're not controlled by our emotion. We're not dependent on all that stuff. So anyway, examining my emotion, that's what we're talking about for here. He talked about when I started examining my emotions, I thought my problems were just caused by career unrest. He said, but now I'm seeing there's a much bigger picture to explore. He says, I've had bruised emotions for years because I've yearned for someone to affirm me. And so, consciously or not, you're concluded that you could not be emotionally secure until you receive the reinforcement you so deeply crave from others. Anybody relate to that? All of us probably to some degree feel it. Yeah, and could be something to look at here and think about how we respond to people just make you mad, and what do? Or you get upset, somebody says the wrong thing to you, looked at you the wrong way, and you get set off. And it's all you can think about. And it's troubling to you. Yeah, I can see where people try all different kinds of things, eating and other things that go along sometimes because of how we respond to how people treat us. But anyway, he says, he talked about how he went that long without really seeing it. He says, most people do not recognize their dependencies because they have not been trained to examine their emotions carefully. If we don't go no more there and just talk about that, what do you think? You think that's true? Were you trained? Was I trained? Or can you think of anything that your mind could think of, or, that I was trained to examine my emotion? Or did I just... Yeah, I've heard that one a bunch. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Dry up, dry it up. Yeah, that was Daddy's famous words. Dry it up. That's how he dealt with it. Give you something to cry about. Yep. Same folks. So what do you think? Um, is it warming up to your mind what he's talking about here? Are you kind of understanding, or y'all are understanding? I just don't want to get too quick on it. What do you think? What do you think he means by training to examine the emotions? Yeah. So what does that look like? Let's put it into play. Let's. I'm not trying to make this long. I just making sure I don't. That you. If you like me, I got to. Okay, I got to put this in real life. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you pull out a 45 and boom, that's it. Problem solved for a while. Yeah. At least till the sirens start coming. That's probably with me, just taking a step back, thinking about it. Walk by faith. You think all emotions wrong? Okay. I'm just throwing it into play here. I wasn't trying to contradict. Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. I've seen a lot of good people fail on that point. They had it here, but they lost it emotionally. So I guess what I'm saying is, um, I've heard the same thing you talk about, and I'm just sitting there thinking about that when it hit me. I thought about it. You know, we're saying no emotion. So what does it really come down to then? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, this is just kind of like a light bulb just went off in my head with this, but I ain't thought about it along this line. So here I am. We're talking about all the negative emotions. Obviously, that's what we're talking about. Anger, whatever, right? But I guess what I'm thinking is, or y'all tell me how to look at it. Well, here I'm just trying to keep from getting mad. You follow where my mind's kind of churning now. So I'm okay. Here I got a bad situation. As long as I don't get mad and all that, and I'm fighting this steam pot inside of me that wants to explode. And so, but what happened? Wouldn't this be a better way of looking at it? And say, well, instead of choosing the emotion, anger, how can I get back to a positive emotion? We'll get there in a minute. We'll get there, but I didn't just hadn't quite looked at it in that light before. But I'm examining all my emotions. If I'm examining why I'm getting angry, I need to examine why I'm happy. Some people are happy at other people's tragedies. I've seen people get, that might not be a great thing. You know what I mean? And dealing with it, I agree with, and I think what you just said there sometimes is something that kind of can trip me up. I don't know how y'all are, but there is a difference between me dealing with it than letting it overcome me. You know. Scared to go there. Okay. Well, yeah, you over you overcome you overcome it. I think that's a big word. So I've seen that. Okay, go ahead. Say that again. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear real well on that one. It's on.
Okay, so for somebody that does take antidepressants,
Okay. Okay.
because they have a problem with controlling their emotions. Um, what is some things that you could, because sometimes I feel too overwhelmed or too stimulated, um, as if I can't control them. And so it's kind of interesting to really realize that I can control them, and I'm excited to kind of figure that out. But like it's a hard thing because sometimes like before, even when I was in a good place with God, I still struggled with it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what they told us some time ago. Really, what some people need, they need maybe an depressant, um, but it's not meant to be the cure. Okay, it was just meant to kind of get you to a place where you can deal with what you need to deal with. So I guess if a person takes that route and it leads them to discover and work on those issues, then they probably could get where they don't even need the antidepressant. I'm speaking from what I've taught. I understand that. Yeah. Well, and again, if I was taking that, I would definitely think I would have to um, consider a lot of things. That's where the doctors and people know what they're doing with that comes in. Understanding, but um, some people may really need it for a purpose that's more than just emotional issues. But if it's that's why I would say a lot of the psychiatrists. That's one of the reasons they do give you the medicine is so they can get you calmed down enough maybe to help work through some issues. So maybe again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know all the answers on that medicine.
Well, to me,
I've heard them talk about it.
well, to me, when they put you on that, like you said, they do it so that you can calm down and talk. And once you get to talking and you start digging deep on what makes you be so depressed, I think eventually you get to the point you can get off of them.
If there's not a chemical, I think there are
chemical
things
yeah.
that
I'm not talking that though.
Yeah. So that's really I'm careful
Yeah.
to say because if I'd say they're diagnose everybody on an even keel, that would be wrong. That's why doctors do what they do. But I do think that's what he told me. A lot of people. He said 85%. The same guy that told us this said 85% of depression is anger. It's a manifestation of anger. And I've shared before with the church. What I felt like the Lord showed me was it really. I guess depending on what level, but what the Lord spoke to me was depression is like an anger toward God. Or if somebody don't even believe in God, they believe there's something that's supposed to be watching after them and keeping them, and everything's supposed to be going well for my life, and somebody that's in charge has let them down. That's how it came to, how I felt like the Lord revealed it to me. And I think so. I don't know, maybe we all kind of feel like we got, and I do. I think the favor of God's on my life. And everything, you expect everything to be just so perfect. And then when something happens that throws you for a loop, it can. I know a lady in Brownsville lost her son in a car accident. Beautiful lady. She's a very, very pretty lady. Lost her son. He was about 20 years old on the interstate. Had an accident coming home on a Saturday night. I literally watched depression destroy that lady. Her mind just went almost like crazy. And you look at her looks, you would not believe that was the same woman that she was before. You wouldn't even recognize her. I remember walking years ago after that, and I remember because I talked to her a little while, tried to talk to her about it. So we had left Brownfield, and some years ago after that, I went to Walmart. She had finally got where she could get a whole job at Walmart. Almost not recognized the lady. She was coming up, and it wasn't like she aged. It was just the whole countenance and look at her was just wasn't the same person. So I think again, let me give you this. I was thinking about two people in the Bible and how God dealt with them. Y'all remember Cain, right? If you looked at, you remember what God said to Cain. Remember the sacrifices. Abel had offered a more sacrifice. And Cain, remember, he got upset and all this stuff because his wasn't being accepted. Do y'all remember what the Lord asked him or said to him? Say it loud. I'm sorry. It sounded like mumble. That was the last part of it. That was part, can you think about the two questions he asked him? Yeah, but there's a question that he directed, two questions directly toward this anger. I don't know if you remember that. You're right though. What you said was right. That was part of the conversation. But it actually this happened before. This actually happened before he killed Abel. Here's what he asked him. He says, "Why are you mad, or why are you wroth?" If you go King James, what was God doing? Why are you like God didn't know why he was angry? God knew. So I took it like the Lord was getting him to examine his emotions. You see it? And then he says, "Why is your countenance falling?" You ever ask your kids what's wrong? That's what God was doing, asking his kid what was wrong. Why is your countenance? What's wrong with you today? You seem like something's bothering you. It's obvious when it happens and everything. But I thought it was kind of interesting how God caused Cain, and then he said what you said. If you do well, won't you be accepted? But if not, sin lies at the door, and you basically must master over it. And so that's what he said, but he had him to examine and think about his emotion that he was feeling at that point. The very first people, they don't even say that Adam and Eve ever got mad. So this is the first instance of anything being said at all by anger in the whole Bible. First mention's always big in the Bible, by the way. I'm sure there's some exception, but for first mentions in the Bible is really a big thing. If you can go back earlier and say, where was the first person that got mad? It was Cain. And what was going on? What's that? I guess, I never thought about that away. But it don't say that he had a sister that got mad at him or that Eve got mad at him. It just said, if we're going to be technical, let's be technical. Somebody else in the Bible. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, here's a great prophet. Yeah. You remember what God said to him or anything? Can you remember in the conversation? I'm trying. Yeah. 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 He was hiding in the cave. uh, Jonah. Uh-oh. It's either going real good or real bad. We're going to be praying either way. Uh, yeah, yeah. And you remember what he said to him? So I did look it up. I pronounced Jonah. God said to Jonah in addressing the anger. Y'all remember? Dost thou well to be angry? Matter of fact, that was in verse 9. Yeah. And then again in that's verse 4, and in verse 9 he repeats it again because he was angry about Nineveh, God forgiving Nineveh. Then he prepared the gourd. Remember that? And brought a shade over Jonah. He was so happy for that shade that was protecting from the heat, and then a worm showed up and killed it, cut it down. Then he was mad, so he asked him a second time. He said, "Does thou well to be angry for the gourd?" And he said, basically 120,000 people here that don't know the left hand from the right hand. And he says, it wasn't right for me to spare them. And, because of all the pity, Jonah, he was showing pity to a gourd. He had more pity toward the gourd than he was having toward the people, for sure. Yeah. to think about what God did, though. Not just the question, but just not just what he asked him, but it's just the question in itself. Does thou well to be angry? He was getting Jonah to think about his whole idea why he's so mad and everything. So if God spoke that to me or you, well, I don't know what we do. We probably say, okay, probably ought not to be angry, but it's not well to be angry in the situation that he was in, because God forgave those 120,000 people and spared them basically from a judgment that was going to come down on them. And anyway, I thought it was interesting that how he's talking about examine our emotions. Right in the middle, well, down about 2/3 of the way, that paragraph, ideally, as children develop, they should first feel secure that their parents, family, and friends love them unconditionally. Okay? Then, as they mature, they should be trained to contemplate independently how they will handle their their many emotions. So, I'm sure we all been there before, with our kids. Again, I got the short answer a lot of times, just dry it up, stuff like that. Didn't help, but we did learn a lot of good stuff too, and coping with life. And I think that's what I found out. A lot of people don't know how to cope, and again, our emotions. That's good. I think, yeah. Again, who's never been in a hurry? You got something going on. Your child makes a statement, and you really got time for that, so you just cut it off. And a good point. Yeah, and I can say that patiently. We talk about, first of all, they need to feel secure and loved and everything. I don't know what I don't know what the split up home ratio, the kids coming from split up homes, what the percentage of kids. I'm sure it's pretty high. 10-year old, yeah, should never happen. Yeah, yeah, and I think about what he said about this guy. Your daddy didn't really show much. A lot of time went up drunk, get on a drunk or whatever, and so and here's the mother having to deal with life, paying all the bills and managing everything by herself. She had very little time for her kids. It sounds like you hear that all the time. Everybody, a lot of even grown-ups. I'd say about this is what my mind thinks. Just because your body's mature don't mean you emotionally are mature at all. Yeah, yeah. You, it's like it's not something you grow out of necessarily. I know it's not, and so it's just like an ongoing cycle. Mm. Well, anyway, he said realistically, most people are not encouraged to think through the meanings of their emotion, and so they depend on their circumstances. It's dangerous because no circumstances can possibly produce the exact ingredients for anyone's emotional stability. Wow. Life ain't going to ever be perfect. One of the things I keep thinking about, a lot of people just leave it. They don't raise their kids. You said that, what they were raised in. Some of them are not even raised. But I'll never forget one time Joe Hall, he was over my house and I planted some strawberries. And I never really raised any berries. I've seen Daddy raise berries and stuff. So I had a patch, and my little patch was growing, and runners and everything was going everywhere. Well, Joe come there and looked at my strawberries, and he said something that just one of the moments that helped me. God took it and helped me there. Anyway, he told me how his daddy would train those vines. I didn't even thought about that. But he would do, take a dirt clod, and he pull the runner into the row where he wanted. That way he was training that to go where he wanted to go. Of course, my mind thought about children and stuff like that. If you just let it run wild, you're going to have something that's totally out of control. But if you learn that the training, the Bible says, train up a child in the way it should go, and then when it's old, won't depart from it. So, the training process got to be happening. We think, well, magically they're going to turn out. No, I think the best parents I know didn't leave it up to magic. They were very, they spent the time, to teach them and spend with their kids, and they went through the tough spots with them and trained them. And the kids love them more. That's good. That's true. I'm mom, that's why. I've seen that poster. certainly their ability to learn and focus and yeah, and my mind thought about that too. How when we coming up, you had chores. We worked, we done things, we had responsibilities. That was good. We really didn't have what you call, like now where you had hours upon hours where you didn't have nothing you could do. Basically, you're just sitting there in a house or whatever. I got to think that that can't be a great thing, because you leave it up again to their mind what you're going to do. Pick up stuff from TV or from the phone or whatever comes along, Like, no. Yeah, I do too. Yeah, again, you're stuck in a house and you wait for hours and hours and you got nothing to do. You got TV. I couldn't do that. Even as a grown person, I don't think I could handle that. It drive me nutty just sitting there thinking I can't. Even on a rainy day when I can't get outside, that's bad enough. People, I've kind of thought on this here. Training to contemplate. He says, or to think about independently on their own. About how to handle the emotions. That would be pretty interesting, probably, to think about how y'all try to um, help kids with their emotions. Wow. think that's a lesson I've learned over the years too. Always said it like, don't ever discipline your child when you're real angry, real mad. You become abusive if you ain't careful.
And apologize to them. Like, that's something we never heard growing up was I'm sorry or I was in the wrong. Like, it was never, an apology. Even if, for instance, I cussed one time and my mama literally poured Dawn dishwashing down my throat because she was going to wash my mouth out. And I literally about died because I was choking on it the whole time. And after I was like, Mom, you say those words, why can't I say those? I didn't understand that it was cussing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like, you're raising me. If you can say those words, why can't I say those? But it was never, oh, I'm sorry, you don't say that.
Yeah.
Okay, what else am I doing that I'm not supposed to be doing because I'm following his footsteps? So it's just, a lot of like behaviors growing up that
But we have never had a generation that we got right now, how that the children are shooting their parents and telling their parents to abandon the kids and all of that. But I think they just don't take time out to spend time together with each other as a family.
and leaving that screen time when they go, that those things are just going to
Yeah,
affect
living
them.
their life.
Spending time, with parents are not, kids aren't thinking when it's this time together, it's a mess.
God definitely knew what this world was going to be.
Now times are a lot different than when I grew up. I'm not a mom. I grew up with kids still, but I could never understand how a parent could want to stop or wasn't going to take care of their kids. I mean, you made them, raise them, and it's like when we were younger, I always remember sitting on the front porch for dinner. So we sit on our front porch, and I was in the home, I sit in the rocking chair, I cook your dinner, and I clean up. And we would just have like our quiet time, and we would sing and pray, and it was just peaceful and enjoyable, and you don't see a lot of parents taking time with their children now. It's more of, I need to pray for my kids. But I don't know, like, just learn how to, I would love to be a mom one day. I pray that God will allow me to be. But if not, then, I'm okay with that too. But I guess there's so many people that want children. There's possibilities that they can't have any. I can't imagine why a parent would pick something over their child. That's just, that dumb sounds to me so much because I know what my mom went through. And my mom, had 3 jobs at one time just to provide for us. So, it dumbfounds me sometimes.
I guess we just treat everyone we don't have anything good in any way, teacher, person, parent, is like that.
Oh,
I,
God.
I and can't give any credit because a lot of stuff I learned the hard way, but they teach me how to take listen, and when I made mistakes and they would go to bed at night and I was trying to say, okay, Lord, what am I going to do about this? And he would show me my mistakes and how I was part of the problem and how I needed to fix me before I could fix them.
God makes all the difference. There's no doubt.
All of it.
Well, time has got away. I'm going to go ahead and so and everything. Good discussion. I liked it. I learned a lot myself tonight. I thank the Lord for that. I needed to learn.
Prayer request that you sent me at the end. It's on your text. If we could pray for him. The park's not working still. The mold is
Okay.
well, trying to work on it. And they were 13 hours today. They were supposed to figure out what to do next with him. If we could pray occasionally.
Okay. Yeah.
Had a picture. If we would pray over him and Rose.
We will. And when we're closing, let me say this. And I'm telling everybody ahead of time. I don't know for sure it's going to happen, but we're talking about Nancy, Sister Nancy Mike.